Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast.
Before we begin, we wanted to share some good news. In response to recent feedback, we've removed the embedded advertising from the middle of the podcast. We've also taken time to improve the pacing, to allow more room for reflection. And we've worked to make each episode clearer without reducing the intellectual depth. In return, we'd be grateful if you could leave a review on iTunes. It helps us know if we're on the right track. We want this podcast to keep evolving, and your thoughts, feedback, and ideas play a meaningful role in shaping that. Let's dive in. This episode is about what happens when language becomes too fluent, when care is carefully structured, and when every moment is designed to be safe, yet something essential goes missing. Set inside a beautifully curated gathering, it traces the emotional atmosphere of a space where nothing goes wrong and yet very little lands, where inclusion is total, empathy is ambient, and sincerity is performed with perfect grace. Everyone was fluent. That was the first thing you noticed. The ease, the cadence, the way sentences carried all the right shapes, disclosures, acknowledgements, accountability. No one lied, no one resisted. There was no failure, just alignment. It was the kind of conference where empathy was embedded in the lighting, where the tote bags were recycled canvas, where the oat milk didn't need to be requested, where no one said anything wrong, not because they didn't want to, but because everything had been pre-resolved. Panels on belonging, workshops on listening, keynotes on restorative design, everything arranged for resonance, everything calibrated to include. And they were good, earnest, composed, unfailingly precise. But it felt like watching an operating system run. The language was careful, softened. Even when grief was mentioned, it moved like choreography, slowed down, held, released. No one was unprepared, no one was exposed, no one was left out. It was emotionally ergonomic, frictionless. There was a moment when someone cried, the group paused, a hand reached out, a moderator said, "Thank you." Everyone held the space, but no one held them. It wasn't dishonest, it wasn't hollow, it was rehearsed, and that rehearsal had become the rhythm, the posture, the standard. You didn't have to believe, you just had to perform understanding at the right volume, in the right tone, with the right disclaimers. There was still sincerity, but it had a format now. You could feel it, like lighting that's too even, like a temperature set slightly too low. Everything was present, but nothing touched. And the structure never slipped, it held. Perfectly. That was the first sign. Not that something was wrong, but that nothing was at risk. It didn't begin with doubt. It began with fluency. People said things like, "I'm still unpacking that," and everyone nodded. Same tempo, same phrasing, same pause. There was no conflict, no discomfort, no rupture, but there was a texture, like air that had been over-filtered. No dust, no scent, no variation. The feeling wasn't falseness, it was saturation. Even silence had been designed. You could hear it in the gaps, intentional, framed, safe. There was a slide for complexity, a panel for tension, a script for harm. You could disclose your trauma in the rhythm of credentialing, not to center yourself, but to stay visible, not to reveal pain, but to locate it safely, to manage it publicly, to be seen as someone doing it right. People said they were tired, but it was a kind of ambient tired, like a constant hum that never peaks, like being surrounded by warmth that never becomes heat. The room felt held, but never stirred. Everything floated, nothing landed. Even the rawest truths were beautifully phrased, acknowledged, validated, processed. But not touched. You could feel it, in the way every phrase rounded off at the edges, every statement smoothed to avoid abrasion. And still, you could sense the dissonance. A subtle tension between the grief inside you and the perfect sentence it was expected to inhabit. Not because anyone was dishonest, but because no one had to be honest to be understood. It was all designed to be inclusive. Every phrase, every gesture, every detail of the event space. You didn't need to know the rules. They had already been written around you. There were no wrong notes, only tonal variations, and every variation had a home. Each session began with acknowledgements, not just of land or labor, but of emotion, complexity, discomfort. People said things like, "We want to honor whatever's alive for you today," and everyone nodded, even if nothing was. The walls were covered in careful language, soft fonts, soft colours, soft commitments. The signage said things like, "You belong here. We're listening. Thank you for showing up." The message was clear. There will be no rupture. It was the kind of conference where even disagreement had been safely choreographed. Voices raised only slightly, differences noted, held, redirected. If someone said something sharp, the moderator thanked them for their courage. There was a pause. Then someone asked about lunch options. The institution didn't avoid discomfort. It pre-absorbed it. Every criticism had a slide deck. Every concern had a breakout room. Every voice had already been accounted for. Which meant nothing had to change. People said things like, "I take full accountability." But they didn't say, "I was wrong." They didn't say, "I didn't see you." They didn't say, "I failed." Because no one needed to fail. Everything was already being addressed. The system didn't enforce belief. It didn't even request it. It just offered inclusion on terms that couldn't be interrupted. There was no need to push back, because the format had already included the push, had already anticipated the rupture, had already filed it. It wasn't oppressive, it was graceful, smooth, unflinching. So smooth that by the end of the second day, you couldn't tell the difference between care and compliance. Only that both were equally quiet. Then someone asked, not loudly, not performatively, just asked, "Are you happy?" Not during a keynote, not during a session, just in the corridor, near the filtered water. No announcement, no emotional framing, no reflexive humility, just a question, old-fashioned, direct, unformatted. It wasn't clear who they meant, maybe no one, maybe everyone, but it landed. Not, "Are we happy?" Not, "How's everyone feeling?" You. Are you happy? Because it didn't sound like part of the event. It didn't belong to any panel. It didn't hold space. It didn't perform care. It just arrived. You felt it first in your body. That catch in the breath. That subtle vertigo when something real appears where nothing unscripted was meant to be. No one followed up. No one built a breakout group around it. No one took notes. When we returned to the hall, the conference continued. The sessions resumed, the slides advanced, the language held, but something had changed. Not on the agenda, in the air. The question hadn't broken anything. It had just made everything else visible. You could hear it, in the way people paused, in the way their sentences thinned at the edges. They still said the words, still named the impact, still spoke in careful tones, but now there was a gap between the feeling and the form. We weren't disrupted, we were revealed, and once that happened, once the frame is seen, you can't return to behaving as if it's invisible. No one acknowledged it, there was no group reflection, no one quoted the moment, but it lingered as pressure, as contrast, as something that didn't fit but wouldn't leave. You noticed it in how someone hesitated before offering a comment, in how another person looked down just a second too long. Not avoidance, not discomfort, just recognition. That something real had passed through, and it hadn't asked to be held. The atmosphere recalibrated, not completely, but enough. The format still ran, but it no longer felt whole. Not because anyone failed, but because for a moment the room had remembered what it was like to be reached. The system kept running, the gestures stayed smooth, the language stayed careful. No one stopped the flow. But inside, something was shaking, not visibly, not even collectively, but privately in the way meaning started to fall short of the sentences that once held it. You still said the right things, still paused in the right places, still nodded with intention, but now the nod felt hollow. The words felt distant. The act of speaking sounded like remembering a role you weren't sure you meant anymore. The emotional machinery was still in motion, checking, validating, responding. But something had disconnected. You weren't tired from caring. You were tired from pretending that care still moved anything. Even your own voice felt foreign, like hearing a recording of someone trying to sound present. There were still workshops, still opportunities to reflect, still safe spaces, but they felt like echoes, well lit, beautifully phrased. And the question, it hadn't asked for anything, it hadn't been loud, but it had exposed how little the structure could actually hold. Not because it wasn't trying, but because it had been built to simulate holding. Now, inside that simulation, you were quiet. Not in awe, not in fear, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when a part of you has already stopped answering back. The question never returned. No one repeated it, no one built a session around it, but it stayed, humming, low and internal, not in the mind, in the body. In the way posture shifted, in the way a breath caught mid-sentence. It didn't need vocal validation. It wasn't looking for response. It had already done what it came to do. It interrupted nothing, and still, everything began to behave differently. People spoke with slightly more space, their voices quieter, not with caution, but with uncertainty that didn't feel staged. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a soft distortion, a gentle drift from fluency. And no one said it, but we all knew. The answer was no. Not angrily, not in protest, just honestly, internally, undeniably, we had been participating in our own frictionless assimilation. Saying the right things, holding the right silences, becoming fluent in a language designed to process everything without changing anything. The systems hadn't failed, they had succeeded. But in their success, they had revealed what could not be touched by format. And somehow, that made room for something else. Not belief, not resistance, just a trace of something that might be real because it refused to perform. They took the words home, not the statements, not the insights, not the closing rituals of gratitude and recognition. The other words, the ones that didn't fit, the ones that didn't resolve. That question, that pause, that feeling that wasn't planned. You could see it in how they left. Not rushed, not late, just changed. A little slower, a little less rehearsed. The way someone folded their lanyard twice before placing it down. The way someone else lingered by the door as if forgetting something they never brought. They didn't talk about it, didn't post about it, didn't bring it up on the Monday call, but it showed up in their pacing, in the way they answered with fewer buffers, in how their eyes stayed a moment longer before turning away. The question didn't ask for belief, it asked nothing. And that's why it stayed. It hadn't been shaped for sharing, hadn't been tested for resonance, hadn't been softened for inclusion. And so it couldn't be processed, only carried. It moved with them, into emails, into dinners, into the space just before falling asleep. Until next time.